Welcome to section 4.2 in our workbook. We're going to start on page 84, and we're going to be reading imperial measurements today. Before we get to that, we're going to do a little warm-up with fractions because imperial measurements involves lots of fractions, so we're going to make sure that we remember our fraction part. So number one, it says shade in half of the circle. So it doesn't matter which half. You can do a top half, side half, right half. I've decided to shade in this right-hand side. And you can see that that's half of it, which takes up two of the little blocks in here. Well, how many blocks are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4. That means it's doing 2/4 of it. Well, of course, 2/4 and 1/2 mean the same thing. You can see that 2/4 is the same as half of the circle. Same thing with the second one. This looks to be in chunks of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I cover up half of them, then that must be the same as 4/8, which of course is the same as 1/2. And the last one looks like it's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 16 of them. And so if I cover up half of those, that would be, of course, 8/16, which is the same as 1/2. It's nice when you see it in a circle, but you can also imagine them in like a vertical line here. So we've got a full whole is the whole thing, and you see it's broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So the first one is shaded in is one out of those 4 sections. So the fraction is 1/4. The second one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's broken up into 8 sections, and we have 2 of those 8, so we must be talking about 2/8. But if you look carefully, you see how the amount of shaded region is the same in that part as it is in that part. And so 2/8 must be the same as 1/4. And of course, we know that by dividing the top and the bottom by 2, you get that is 1/4. This one here is something a little bit less than 1/4, but this seems to be broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, I'm going to guess 16. And I don't actually have to guess because if you look at it here, I know this is 8, and each of these sections is broken up into 2 smaller ones. So it's twice as many sections, which means we're at 16. And then the shaded region is 3/16 is that. If I wanted to get 1/4 of this section, I would need one more section colored in and get 4/16, which reduces to 1/4. Reducing is an important part of fractions to make sure that we have it in the best way to describe it. So when we see 2/4, just like up here, 2/4 is the same as 1/2. 2 out of 8, excuse me, just like here, 2 out of 8 is the same as 1/4. So reduce the top and the bottom by 2, divide the top and the bottom by 2, we get 1/4. 6 out of 8, well, again, is there a number that goes into both 6 and 8? Sure, 2 goes into both of them. So divide the top by 2, you get 3, the bottom by 2, you get 4 and 3/4. So there you've got 3/4. 6/8, you can imagine here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be colored up to here. Let's actually color that in. We've got a little marker here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or sorry, 6 of the 8 sections is colored in. Oh, I'm doing a really good job with my coloring. Would be the same as this part here, which is the same as 3/4. So you can really see that there. Wish I could color better, but that's all right. And then 16/16, well, that means we would shade in all of these 16 boxes, which would be the same as one whole. And then you can imagine also that fractions and percents come into play. And so quickly we can see the nightstand is 7% of the bedroom floor. The dresser apparently is 17% of it. And the bed and bookshelf, we have the bed is 22 and the bookshelf is 18. We add that up, we get 40%. The percentage part is related to fractions, but when we're reading imperial measurements like inches and so forth, we will be using fractions most of the time. Okay, so that's the warm-up for section 4.2 on page 84. Let's look ahead at the bottom of it where it says reading an imperial ruler or tape measure. So the tallest lines on the imperial ruler are your whole inches. So you see here the 0 and then 1 and then 2. They are the longest and biggest lines on the tape measure or the ruler. Okay, so those are the whole inches. And then the next shortest or the next longest ones are these ones here. Okay, you can see it's halfway between 0 and 1, so not surprisingly, it is 1/2. So the next longest is a half. So there's a half there, and there's another half here, which means this would be 1 and 1/2. The next shortest lines are the quarters. Okay, so not quite as long as the half, and obviously not as long as the full, but longer than these smaller ones. So there's the quarter. And then, of course, you get smaller. What's half of a quarter? An eighth. Half is an eighth is a 16th. So the smaller the little check mark here, the little tick on your ruler, the smaller the fraction that we are looking at, starting with 1, and then a half, a quarter, an eighth, and a 16th. Some rulers will even go even further and go to 30 seconds and 64ths, but we're only going to go down to 16ths. All right, so that completes page 84. Let's go over and answer the questions on page 85. So we're going to label each of these line segments that are the same height as the 1/4 line. So you see here's the 0 and 1, and this is the 1/4 line that they're looking at. And of course, that one and this one are the same height. That means we have to label this guy. To actually visualize that, you can imagine there's a quarter of the section. This would be another quarter of a section, and this would be 3/4 of the section. It's sometimes easier to see all of the different sections. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we actually shaded in all of these blue lines, 1, 2, 3, you can see that, and 4/4 would be a whole. Okay. But it does bring up this little question in the light bulb off to the side. Why is the 2/4, which should be 1, 2, right here, why is it not the same length as the other quarters? Well, 2/4 is actually reduced down to 1/2. And you can see that it's exactly halfway in between 0 and 1. So that line, even though it is a quarter line, also represents a half line, so it has to be bigger. Okay, and you'll see that all throughout. These smaller ones, of course, are 16ths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 16. But as you go along, you see that some of them, like this, would be 4/16 reduces to a quarter, or 8/16 reduces to a half. And so the length of the line has to go with the reduced number of 1/2. Okay. Let's look at number 2. Label each line that is the same height as the 1/8. Okay, so there's the 1/8 line, and if you look at all these ones here, you can see all of those are also 1/8 lines. But it's best if we think of each little section. So look at this section here. From here is 1/8, and then from here to here is 2/8, and you can see all of the 8 different counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can see all of the 8s. It helps with your counting. So if we are saying this is 1/8, this is 2/8, but you see it's a little bit longer than the 8s. That means because that's actually a quarter, but we're not going to label that one. We are going to label this one. So 1, 2, 3/8. This would be 4/8, but 4 out of 8 is 1/2. Okay, so we're not labeling that one because it's not the same length. 4/8. This is 5/8. 6 is here. We're skipping it. 7/8. And then, of course, 8/8 would be at the end. All right, so labeling all of those is 1/8, 3/8, 5/8, and 7/8. So this a pattern seems to be emerging with all of these. If you look at this number, this is 1/8, not 2, 3, not 4, 5, not 6, 7. Well, if we think of the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, those are all the odd numbers. And if you, each of these then are the odd parts of the fractions. So why is that? So they're going up by odd eighths. So 1/8, 2/8 is an even eighth, 3/8 is an odd eighth, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. So the reason it's going up by odd eighths, these every other one, is because, well, 1, they were going every other one, and 2, the 2/8, the even odds all reduce. So, because 2/8 would reduce, and 4/8 would reduce, 6/8 reduce, and 8/8 reduce. That's why we're only seeing the 1, 3, 5, 7. That's somewhat helpful when we are doing this. All right, so that was the 8th line. And then now we're going to look at the smallest tick on this ruler, which is the 16ths. So again, we can look at all the ones that are the same height as the 16ths, but of course recognize there are more than just those ones, it's the ones in between them. And we can count them up, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 16. And that helps us when we are counting. So if I was going to label this guy, which is the same height, this is 1, skipping 2, and 3/16. Why are we skipping 2? Well, 2/16 is actually an eighth. Divide the top and the bottom by 2, and you get 1/8. So it's not that we're skipping it because it's not important. It's just it's not a 16th. It reduces to an eighth. All right, let's do the count. 3, 4, 5. Here's the 5/8, 7. And if we keep this pattern up, remember the pattern that we saw in eighths with all the, or number 3 in all of the eighths, going up by the even numbers, this pattern is continuing here. So 1, 3, 5, 7. What's the next odd number? That's 9. The next odd number is 11, 13, and 15. And we can see all those counts. Okay, so that pattern does continue there. One way I like to look at the 15/16 is actually to look, instead of count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I like to look at the end and say, I know that if we're talking 16ths, the end must be 16, and this is one before the end, and that's 15/16. That I find helpful. And then of course we have those in between parts. 1/8, this is 2/8, this is 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and then those can go even further from what we measured before. 1/4, this is 2/4, this is 3/4. And why did I skip this? Well, that's exactly halfway in between. It's 1/2. Why are there no other lines as the 1/2 line? You see how the quarters have some partners, and the eighths and the 16ths all have other ones on there, but there's no other one that is 1/2 long. Well, that's because, of course, if you take two halves, you would get to a whole. There's no other half. The next half line is a whole, and it has to be a longer tick than the others. So that's why you're only seeing between 0 and 1, you're only going to see one line that's the same height as the half, whereas you'll see multiple quarters and eighths and 16ths. The most you'll see is 16ths because there are a whole bunch of them. All right, so that gets us to number 6. And now we're going to put this stuff all together and be able to try our best to measure our imperial ruler. So this is really what the whole goal of this lesson is to practice measuring imperial rulers. So you'll see here a section of a ruler. It's only 2 inches wide, 0, 1, and 2. The one we were looking at before was all 1 inch wide. This is 2 inches wide. So let's start with this spot here. And I might need to sort of help visualize some of the counting that I'm doing. So when I look at an imperial ruler, the one spots I look at are halves and quarters. I really like to sort of see where they are because they're easiest to find, and they also then will help me with the other measurements. So it's pretty clear that this right here is halfway between 0 and 1. So that's 1/2. And then if I look, what is halfway between a half? That's right there, which is a quarter. Okay, so half of a half is a quarter. Think about that. If you had $1, and if you took half of $1, it's 50 cents, and a half of a 50 cents is a quarter, 25 cents a quarter. Okay, you can also think of it as a percent. So regardless, this is a half, which is 1/4. So that's 1/4 of an inch. We should probably put the little inch ticks on this. So 1/4 inch. Okay. All right. What's next? Well, B is next. And you see that it is almost a 1 complete hole. It is only 1 tick less than a hole. But the key is, which tick is this? This is the smallest tick, which means I must be talking 16ths. Let's just see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So this looks like 15/16. A complete whole inch would be 1 inch or 16/16. This is 1 tick less, so that's 15/16. And I'm going to put my little ticks on that one too to represent 15/16 of an inch. All right. Next, you see that C and D are past. It is between the 1 and the 2. So whatever measurements these are, we have to consider the whole and then one or two, a couple of chunks after that. So what's great on this one is it looks like this spot is in the same spot as this, but after 1. So again, if I looked at this, you see how this is 1, 2, I should make this longer, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these ticks here are all a quarter of it. You can see there's a half, and half of a half is another quarter. So this is in the same position as this guy, okay, in the same position as that guy, except it is past the 1/2 or the 1 inch mark, which means this is 1 1/4. 1 1/4. And 1/4 inches. Okay, so it's nice, you can actually see that space, and I'm going to help you visualize that by sort of whiting it out here. So watch this. So I'm just going to draw this box here, and I'm going to click on the box and make it white. Okay, so it's just a little too big. There we go. All right, so you see how that is a quarter of an inch, and that box, that same box, is right here. So it's 1/4 past the largest tick. So it's nice that you can see there's 1/4, and it's the same measurement here to this. The only difference between this tick and this tick is it's after the 1. So this is 1 1/4. Similarly, D is 1 and some 15ths or 16ths. And again, you can see it's in the same spot as this guy. That means it must be 15 ticks past 1. So this is 1 15/16. Okay, 1 15/16 inches. It's almost 2. And you remember I said how sometimes I like to look at the largest one and go backwards. So 2 would be here. It is 1 tick less, so it's 15/16. It is 1 15/16 before I got to a complete 2. All right, so that it gets us up to page 85. We are not going to do page 86 or 87, so we're not going to go any further in your workbook, but we are going to practice a couple of more reading of the ruler here. This is what your quiz is going to be all on, and this is the most important part of this imperial measurement section, being able to read this ruler. So let's look at a couple of other spots here. So here's a tick again. I'm going to go to this spot. So again, I like to think of my halves. So here's 0 and 1. This is 1/2. What's half of a half? That's a quarter. And what's half of a quarter? Well, that's an eighth. And you can kind of see all of the 8 ticks if I wrote them out. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this is one of those 8 sections. Okay, and so this ends up being an eighth. Let's look here. Okay, it is more than 1, so we should already see it's 1 and something. And again, I'm going to imagine, see all the half ticks. So there's 1 and 2. What's halfway in between? There's a half, so that's 1.5. And then this is halfway between here and a half, which is a quarter. So that makes this part 1 1/4. So 1 1/4 inch. I should add those little ticks again. Let's just put the... There we go. Let's just put the 1/8 inch in there and do the same thing for this, 1 1/4 inch. Okay, let's look at some more. Let's try this one here. So if you can see, we've got our green part here. I'm going to go, there is 1/2 between 0 and that. There is a quarter, and this is 3/4. You can see it's broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. And if we go from here all the way to here, we get 3 of those 4 sections. So this is 3/4 of an inch. Okay. Let's look at the end. Let's look at this spot here. So you can see it's almost at the end between, 1 and 2. So it is very close to the end of 2. And it's this length. So that those are in eighths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, I want to think of what would a full thing be in eighths. This would be 8/8, and I am coming 2 ticks back or 1/8 tick back to get 7/8. You can really see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/8. So this is 1 and 7/8. Oh, sorry. All right, and the last one. Let's look at this guy here. So I'm just going to get rid of some of this. So you can see it's the smallest tick, and remember our smallest tick is in 16ths. So we can just count all the small ticks: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this would be 9/16 of an inch. Now there's a couple of ways you can do that. Inches there, 9/16 of an inch. The other way to look at it is this. This is between 0 and 1, there's 16 ticks. So halfway would be 8 ticks. This would be 8/16. And this is just 1 tick past that. So that's why it's 9/16. And it doesn't reduce to anything else. So that's another way that you can imagine reading this. Okay? All right. So your quiz then is to just practice reading that. You're going to see another blank ruler. It'll look something like this with an arrow pointing to it, and you're going to go off and type in or choose your multiple choice answer. Just be aware that when we go off and do this on multiple choice, we're going to see stuff like this: 1 and 1/4. Okay, so that's how we're going to have to write this when we type it. Okay, but you see that space really helps us. So this is 1 and 1/4. Okay, so you'll see that as an option for a possible answer in the multiple choice quiz. All right, good luck on that quiz.